My name is Patrick Mullins. I'm an AEC technical specialist here at Greytech. Let's start by looking at what COBie is. COBie is an international standard for exchanging building data. COBie is a better way of handing over data than it's done previously. It's a standardized and streamlined process for handing information over to the client. This isn't a new standard, it's been around for a long time, more than 10 years. Let's think about how we used to present data, either during or at the end of a project. So typically, the relevant information about that project would have been presented in various different forms, in documents, in drawings, in PDFs, with that information being presented on flash drives, or CDs, or hard copy. The information would have been presented in various formats. It wouldn't have been to a standard, such that that information may not have actually been useful. It may have even been the case that the client would have to reproduce that information in a format that was compatible, maybe with any asset or facility management software that they may or may not be using. So the benefits of using COBie is that it removes inefficiencies. It's presenting the information in a standardized way. The information is presented as and when required, and it's captured and exchanged. Typically, it would be captured and exchanged at relevant stages throughout the project, typically in what's called a data drop. And the information is consolidated into a standardized format, a spreadsheet. So fulfilling your COBie requirements ultimately requires you to produce a COBie spreadsheet. If we take a look at the traditional information delivery cycle, here at the delivery stage, we can see that we have a requirement to present information at certain stages throughout the process. These, as I've mentioned, are referred to as data drops. So certain information has to be presented at a certain stage, and that information needs to be standardized. It needs to be presented in a format which is consistent and is useful. Typically, these data drops mimic the typical REBA stages with some variation, but typically it replicates that design process. So your deliverable is a COBie spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet will be formatted in a very specific way, differently depending upon where you are within the world. The COBie spreadsheet is the basis for you to fulfill your COBie requirements. The information that's presented within the spreadsheet will have different responsibilities. It will be the responsibility of different people to present information within this spreadsheet. So typically, the design responsibility may be a requirement to present information about the facility itself, about the complex, information about the floors, the stories within that complex, the rooms and spaces within the complex, which may or may not have been grouped together into a zone. So we present information about the zone, the spaces within a zone. And then we'd present information about the entities within the rooms or the spaces within the zones. And that information may be in the form of a type. So typically, you could think of the type-based information replicating Revit types, if that was the software that you were using. Typically, we'd have components, which would be similar to instance-based information, again within Revit, or a system, which may be a collection of components grouped together to provide a solution, curtain walling, for example. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Fulfilling Your COBie Requirements. My name is Patrick Mullins. I'm an AEC technical specialist here at Greytech. Let's start by looking at what COBie is. COBie is an international standard for exchanging building data. COBie is a better way of handing over data than it's done previously. It's a standardized and streamlined process for handing information over to the client. This isn't a new standard, it's been around for a long time, more than 10 years. Let's think about how we used to present data, either during or at the end of a project. So typically, the relevant information about that project would have been presented in various different forms, in documents, in drawings, in PDFs, with that information being presented on flash drives, or CDs, or hard copy. The information would have been presented in various formats. It wouldn't have been to a standard, such that that information may not have actually been useful. It may have even been the case that the client would have to reproduce that information in a format that was compatible, maybe with any asset or facility management software that they may or may not be using. So the benefits of using COBie is that it removes inefficiencies. It's presenting the information in a standardized way. The information is presented as and when required, and it's captured and exchanged. Typically, it would be captured and exchanged at relevant stages throughout the project, typically in what's called a data drop. And the information is consolidated into a standardized format, a spreadsheet. So fulfilling your COBie requirements ultimately requires you to produce a COBie spreadsheet. If we take a look at the traditional information delivery cycle, here at the delivery stage, we can see that we have a requirement to present information at certain stages throughout the process. These, as I've mentioned, are referred to as data drops. So certain information has to be presented at a certain stage, and that information needs to be standardized. It needs to be presented in a format which is consistent and is useful. Typically, these data drops mimic the typical REBA stages with some variation, but typically it replicates that design process. So your deliverable is a COBie spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet will be formatted in a very specific way, depending upon where you are within the world. The COBie spreadsheet is the basis for you to fulfill your COBie requirements. The information that's presented within the spreadsheet will have different responsibilities. It will be the responsibility of different people to present information within this spreadsheet. So typically, the design responsibility may be a requirement to present information about the facility itself, about the complex, information about the floors, the stories within that complex, the rooms and spaces within the complex, which may or may not have been grouped together into a zone. So we present information about the zone, the spaces within a zone. And then we'd present information about the entities within the rooms or the spaces within the zones. And that information may be in the form of a type. So typically, you could think of the type-based information replicating Revit types, if that was the software that you were using. Typically, we'd have components, which would be similar to instance-based information, again within Revit, or a system, which may be a collection of components grouped together to provide a solution, curtain walling, for example. And then there'll be different information. There'll be common information about the environmental impact of the building, the CO2 emissions, there'll be information, that information will be presented in numerous ways with numerous information presented. We'd have contact details, information about issues. So we would have common information. And then lastly, we'd have information about the build and the commissioning itself. So spares information, job numbers, information about the materials that are used within the entities within the model. So we have lots of information that's being presented in a standardized format in this spreadsheet. To help us relate to that information, it's typically color-coded, and the colors have specific meanings. So typically, something that's yellow would be required information. Salmon and pink may be data that relates to other sheets. So it might be information that's already known on a different sheet within the spreadsheet, and then that's being populated elsewhere. That's driving another sheet, information on another sheet somewhere else. Purple information comes from different software. So we may have some of the data within the spreadsheet linked, being presented with necessarily not from Revit, but from other associated software. And then green information, where this is possibly optional, where the client may or may not require that relevant information. So typically, the information is presented in a standardized format. So information about the facility would be managed through many zones, which describe many spaces, and within those spaces they would contain many components. Typically, the floor would be managed through, the facility would be managed through many floors that comprise many spaces, which again contain many components. And likewise, the type-based information would contain many components, and a system would be comprised of many components. So there's a requirement to present this information in a standardized format. But of course, depending upon where you are in the world, the same information may be presented differently. So here we might refer to a pavement, and in the States it would be referred to as a sidewalk. So we're talking about the same entity but with two different descriptions. Likewise, the difference between football and soccer, a tap and a faucet. So an IT system won't automatically know about those differences, and it will need to be guided to have those differences described. So we need a common language for everything within our model. The equipment, the spaces, the systems, the facilities, the people. We need to present that information in a standardized format. And that standardization is defined via a classification. So depending upon where we are within the world, the formatting of the data, how it's described, will be to a standard. And there are many standards available, and with how the same information is described will be differently, and the amount of information may be different as well. So here in the UK, we would use as a default Uniclass 2015. That would be our standard classification. So what is Uniclass and how is it defined, and who has it been defined by? So the Uniclass standard is delivered here by the MBS within the UK. The Uniclass is a unified classification system for the built environment, covering all sectors and roles, delivered by the MBS. So it's the MBS that define the standard here in this side of the Atlantic. The Uniclass standard has a way of describing the information in a specific format. It makes reference to a complex. So a complex typically may be a hotel, for example, and within that complex we would have entities, so individual buildings within the resort. So we're dealing with complexes and entities. Those entities would have activities associated with them. So it might be a residential, it may be for entertainment, it may be a swimming complex. We have the concept of activities that are associated with the entities. And of course, those entities will have spaces. They'll be described, as a bar, hotel, bedrooms, living areas, etc. So the space would be defined. The entities would be defined by spaces, and those spaces would be defined. The spaces would be made up out of elements, so walls, floors, roofs, etc. Those elements may be grouped together to define a system. So we may have curtain walling, maybe if it's some sort of a restaurant or a pub or whatever it might be, we might have a beer delivery system which may comprise of all of the constituent components that go together to make up this delivering the beer. And then within systems we have products. So we have the individual products that make up the systems. So Uniclass standard defines complexes, entities, activities, spaces, elements, systems, and products in this hierarchy. And these entities are defined via codes. So conveniently, we can describe something with a code, CO for complexes, EN for entities, and so on. So we can describe whether it's a complex and entity via these codes. And the amount of information that's presented, how detailed the information is that's being presented, is defined by the code. We have the ability to define subcategories. So for example, a code of SS defines a system, which may define a system that's associated with either a roof, a floor, or a paving system. And if we drill down further, we can be more and more precise. So it's a roof structure, and then precise even further, a framed roof structure, and so on, until ultimately we can be very specific with our descriptions. To determine one of these codes, this can either be done automatically, or it's to a standard that we can search. On the Uniclass, the MBS website, you can find a code. You can do a search and you can look up a code. So here on the MBS website, where we're looking for a code, you can type in a keyword, and then the software will then give you the specific code associated with your search. So if you need to determine a code manually, that's possible. But equally, we can also have Revit define those codes for us automatically. So to help us define a spreadsheet which is in to the standardized format as dictated by Uniclass, we have the opportunity to use a utility that will help us define that data in the relevant standard. And this is called the Autodesk BIM interoperability tools, or specifically the Autodesk COBie extension for Revit. This is a wizard-based utility that will allow us to present the relevant information in the relevant format, Uniclass in this case, with the relevant codes. So this is a plugin for Revit which is freely available. If you do a search for Autodesk COBie extension for Revit. It will guide you to the Autodesk BIM interoperability tools. If you download and install this utility on top of the relevant version of Revit, you can then use it to automate the process to allow you to fulfill your COBie requirements. So let's delve in and have a look how it's all done. Okay folks, here we are within Revit 2024. We have the BIM interoperability tools installed. We're going to be selectively assigning COBie data to elements within the model, extracting that data and then presenting it in the compliant spreadsheet. Let's start by assigning some contact details. Some of this information is required, some not. And then we'll assign a category to ourselves. So who are we? We're the contact, but what's our business? So we will assign the category from the uniclass database, which we will load. Here we are on the contact heading, so we'll decide, let's say we're an architect. Assign. So I've assigned myself a category. Having applied the contact detail, I'll then assign it. So the first thing I've done is I'll save that. We've assigned some contact detail. I'll save and close. We've set up some contacts. The next thing we'll do is we'll assign a category. So if I just highlight to, if I go to project information, I'll highlight to the fact that there's no information here associated with COBie. Let's, within the interoperability drop-down, assign a classification. We'll assign a classification to the facility, either via complex or entity. So this is an admin building, so we can filter the list, admin, assign. Let's close that down for the moment. Let's go return back to manage, project information. You'll now see that we've assigned a COBie classification with the relevant codes assigned. So back to the interoperability tools. There's no need to close them down. We can leave those open if we wish. The next thing we'll do is we'll set up the project. So again, this is wizard based. These are the steps that we'll run through to assign the relevant information within our spreadsheet. So we'll work our way through the wizard. First thing, locality. Here we're in the UK. Our units. Specify the relevant units. We could have left them with defaults. In terms of identification, we will want to be selective with the information that we're extracting and how it's being extracted. So we'll use mapped parameters, and maybe I'll come back to that in the last stage and reference that again for you. So let's now return. Let's carry on. This model has got some spaces, rooms and spaces assigned to it. If it has building services elements, this is where I'm getting the opportunity to say, look at either a room for that information or a space. Well, if it was a cable tray, then we would expect to find that in a space. If it was something like a door, we'd expect to find that within a room. Here, we get the opportunity to select one or other, or in this case, spaces, space for MEP runs ductwork and conduit, etc. So we can make a sensible choice about where we would interrogate Revit, either for a room or a space, for that information. We also get at the bottom here the opportunity to define some additional data. If we're defining a space numbering system, what fields do we want to include? We'll go with Revit category and number. Okay, so types. Again, we'll specify a build-up of the numbering, the COBie numbering. We'll accept the defaults. We can change these if we wish. For the purpose of speed, we won't. We'll be using the defaults, Revit category, family, and type. What codes, which standard do we wish the codes to be in? Well, we've already mentioned that we will be using Uniclass. So this is a priority, this is an order in which the database is searching for that information. So we'll make reference to Uniclass. This is for the type-based information. We'll do the same for components. We'll specify the field format for component, and likewise any systems that we may have defined. We get the opportunity to be selective about the data that's being extracted and presented in the COBie spreadsheet. Attributes, specifically what information would I like to include within elements within my model. For the purpose of this demonstration, we'll go here with furniture, and then these are the relevant classifications, the relevant parameters that we can assign to those categories. So this is the type-based information, and likewise the same for the instance-based. We'll use the defaults. We will get the opportunity to specify the coordinates, and the information can also be extracted from any schedules or from schedules, and this is our opportunity to define which COBie schedules we wish to extract the data from, if any. And then lastly, if I come back here to mapped parameters, at the first step here, I specified that I wanted to identify mapped parameters. So here at the last stage, when we want, for example, to have the facility name, this is the parameter that we're matching to. We could select a different parameter if we wished. So, okay, let's save and close and OK that data. So the software is now assigning the relevant codes. This is a simple model, so it won't take too long. Here are the schedules. I asked it to create some schedules, and here are the schedules that it's created automatically, assigning COBie data, relevant COBie data to the schedule. So if we take a look at one of the chairs, they're of the category furniture, and now you'll see that the relevant COBie codes have been assigned for the component, and likewise the same for the type. If we take a look again, you'll see that we got relevant information assigned. We've assigned COBie data, COBie parameters to elements within the model. At any point, you can always go back in and and change any of the data here within the interoperability tools. So we've set up the project, we've assigned the contact data, we've assigned some rudimentary COBie parameters. Now let's look at zones. So potentially we may have had several rooms and we might wish to group that data together. Here we have the opportunity to assign a default zone. We'll save that with some relevant information that's missing. So, okay, we'll assign some of that information, assign, and here we get the opportunity to drag and drop any spaces or rooms and assign them to the relevant zone. So in this case, I'll assign that room to this zone. So when you're extracting data about the spatial data, COBie data associated with the model, you can dictate which rooms stroke spaces are assigned to the relevant zone. Okay. So we've assigned zones. Select elements to elements for the export. So I'd like to assign, for this example, I'll extract the furniture data and include that in the COBie spreadsheet. Here it is, it's now extracting that data for the furniture. It's a very simple model, so it won't take very long. Okay. And then finally, having specified all of the properties associated with the COBie sheet, let's create the sheet itself. So here, create the sheet, and then you will get the opportunity to specify what information that's been assigned within the sheet that you wish to extract. Contact information, information about the facility, the floor, the space, the zone type, and so on. And we get the opportunity to specify where we want to put this data, and what would it be called. Here's the spreadsheet that we're creating. Create the spreadsheet. So it's automatically creating the spreadsheet for us. It's determined that there might be some information that's missing, so it has some error checking. So we'd always have the opportunity to go back and assign any information that it says hasn't actually been shown. We'll open the file, the COBie spreadsheet. Here it comes. And now we have a COBie compliant spreadsheet. It's presented in the correct format. It has the relevant number of tabs. So we have some general instructions on the very first tab. Here is the contact information that we assigned for myself. Here's the information I assigned about the facility. Likewise, the same for any floors that we created. Now, a lot of these will be blank because basically I just asked it for information associated with the component and the type. So here is the information that's been assigned to the furniture, type, and the components. So there were 4 chairs. This is the information that's been assigned about those chairs. We have a COBie compliant spreadsheet. If we return back to our model, you will always have the opportunity, as I've said, to close and go back and revisit the interoperability tools. There's an update feature, so if you were to make a change, you can update the spreadsheet, reassign the data to the spreadsheet by updating the extraction. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you found some of this of interest.